A very good evening to you and welcome to Beyond Belief here on Clare FM on this Sunday the 21st of February. I do hope that you're warm and safe wherever you're listening to us this evening, and for the next hour or so, this is Father Gerry Kenny here with you in the chair tonight to present a programme of some chats, music and reflections. We'll be hearing later on in the programme from Michael O Doherty, a native of Doonbeg who has worked in healthcare for a number of years, on his perspective of things. Tuned to Beyond Belief here on Clare FM on this Sunday the 21st of February. Earlier I had the opportunity to sit down with a Doonbeg native, Michael O Doherty. Michael is quite familiar to a lot of people because of his work in healthcare over the past 30 or so years. We had an interesting conversation and we chatted about what things are like at the moment, how it's affecting us, and what is his perspective on things. Michael, I suppose you've been involved for a good number of years in the whole area of healthcare. Tell us a little bit about that work.
Yeah, well, when I first started off, I was in the Air Corps, then I was in the prison service, and I had been involved in martial arts, and of course the GA. So eventually I became aware of some very good work that was going on in what would now be known as Croatia. And it was an area of working with the energy system of the body. And that's 1990, so that's 30 years ago. And of course, when you're young and you're out there and enjoying life, it's not something that you think you'd like to do, but came back to Ireland, started doing this energy work with my friend Tom Griffin from Mayo, who we both worked in Cork. And eventually, with what we were doing, people seemed to be reacting to it. We didn't know what we were doing, but we just knew we were balancing energies and moving energies. Science hadn't evolved to understand the human being from that perspective at this stage. And people were getting better and eventually ended up on the Late Late Show, and Gay Byrne endorsed it practically. And since then, it's just been growing all the time. And the great thing about that is that, science has been able to narrow the gap in the context of understanding about, how the human being functions. So thankfully, 30 years, Gerry, on from where we started, we've seen some amazing stuff happening in life, and of course now more than ever it's more relevant.
I always think one of the challenges of life going through it is there's almost nearly a pressure to compartmentalize our lives. And when I see this in my ministry is very often that people, they nearly forget about the spiritual part of ourselves. We hear a lot about the importance of, looking after our physical well-being. We're hearing an awful lot about our mental well-being. But nurturing the spirit that actually is so important to us can often be, I suppose, maybe sidelined.
It is, and for me in my work for the last 30 years, what I've seen is that when everything else fails, people have a tendency to come back to themselves, to come back to that inner aspect of their own being. And I think, I was only yesterday, I was looking at a YouTube clip that was sent around from Engelbert Humperdinck, whose wife was elderly, had some degree of Alzheimer's, I think it was, but got COVID. And he took to the social media, IT platforms to ask people across the world to pray. So we're seeing this more and more, that people are beginning to recognize the value and the need for a spiritual grounding, because I think this is what's lacking. We have, in some way, we have disconnected from nature. We've disconnected from ourselves. We have attached ourselves to this virtual world through IT platforms. And unfortunately, the consequences are that if we don't connect to that divine aspect of our own being, because ultimately that's where the healing comes from. If we don't connect to that, then what happens is that, there is an imbalance. And if there is an imbalance, then you have disease. And that's technically what it's disease. So if you have an imbalance in who you are, if you deny a part of yourself, so we have a physical, mental, emotional, spiritual being. And if we deny any aspect of that, then we are creating an imbalance. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to find a physical solution to the problems to the spiritual sort of detachment that has taken place, that there is a deficit in the spiritual language in many of the modern day, particularly in younger people. So if we don't, and I think this is a great opportunity, this COVID situation, I think it's a great opportunity because it gives us an opportunity to look at ourselves, look deeper at ourselves, because it's the only place we can go. Hospitals are closed now to a large degree, bar you have something serious. The whole mental health thing is just gone off the wall. So where do we go back to? We've got to go back to ourselves. For me, personally, spiritual grounding is critical. When I get up in the morning, the first thing I do, I open the back door, I look out, I look at the sky, I look at the trees, I look across where I feed birds, I see the birds flying in to get their food. I make sure I connect with that, because if we lose connection with that, then our lives become very fragmented, Gerry, and then when we find ourselves in difficulties, then we don't have that grounding to fall back on. And if we don't have that grounding to fall back on, then we find ourselves in very dark spaces, depressed, anxious spaces.
Michael, in your 30 years of this work and things like that, you have had contact with a lot of famous people and it's, I suppose it's heartening for the rest of us to know that, we're all humans. No matter how much of a profile we might have on the world stage, but you're saying that these important connections are a struggle for everybody, regardless of their status.
Absolutely. The idea that money, big houses, big cars bring us happiness and contentment or peace, that's an illusion. There's nothing wrong with having it. But at a parallel level, we need to understand that we are evolving spiritual beings. And for the people that I've worked with, and you're right, people send in their private jets to pick me up to go to Barbados or Portugal or England or whatever. And the one thing that I've noticed is that those who are very much aware of the divine, God, nature, whatever they want to call it, and communicate through whether it be yoga, whether it be meditation, mindfulness, prayer, whatever. Those seem to manage the stresses and the anxiousness associated with that kind of fame. And that's something that we all have to try and do. That recently I was just talking to a bunch of kids about this, that what would they like to be when they grow up? And, they all want to be famous and they all want to be influencers, but nobody's telling them the consequences of that if they don't understand that at a parallel level, they're evolving spiritual beings, because we are the most valuable asset in our own life. In business, when I see business people coming in who spend years, raking up a lot of money and banking a lot of money to suddenly find themselves in their late 50s or 60s with health issues, now having to spend all the money to get back their health. It's only at that point do we realize that there is a little bit more to life than what we're just being told and what we're being led to believe, particularly to the small screens in the IT platforms. But absolutely, those people that I have dealt with throughout the world, those so-called celebrities, those who have that grounding, our connection with the divine, that spirituality within themselves, those people are far better capable of coping with even the modern day type problems that we're encountering now.
Well, now might be a good time just to take a little break and to listen to some music to feed our spiritual beings. That is the choice of our guest here this evening on Beyond Belief, Michael O Doherty. Michael, the past year has affected everyone in some way or other, and we still have a journey to make through several months of coming out, I suppose, of how we manage this pandemic. How have you seen the effect of this particular COVID experience?
Yeah, initially there was a kind of euphoria about it. People had stopped, they had gone home, the weather was good, they were expecting they were going to be locked up. They used the word lockdown for a month or whatever, and that everything would be okay and come back to normal. However, that wasn't the case. There's only many times you can mow the lawn, and so many times you can wash the car, and so many times you can go online to be doing different exercises. But again, the challenges, as we move forward, the challenges became more. They became deeper, they became emotional, they became mental. And what I found certainly, that in dealing with my work, was that people bought into this concept of lockdown. And I think the wrong vocabulary was used. Because in reality, people weren't locked down. When I worked in the prison service, lockdown was you were behind closed doors. It was shut down. Everything was shut down. And I think the wrong vocabulary was used. So what's happening now is that we're transitioning. I believe the world is going through a transition. I believe the church is going through a transition. I believe education, how we run our lives is going through a transition. And it is in this transitional phase that I feel there is a deficit in skill in how we can navigate our way through these sort of murky waters. And this is where the deficit is, that the society, going back to what we talked about prior to the break, that because we didn't have that basic spiritual grounding, that we didn't have anything to fall back on when this situation arose. So now people are looking to find ways of dealing with anxiety, to deal with stress. We see the increase in domestic violence. We see the increase in the UK. We just saw last week children under 10 turning up to the A&Es, attempting suicide and self-harming. So we're seeing a massive, we're being exposed to something we were never exposed to before. But however, I genuinely believe that we will evolve out of this as better beings, because this situation is forcing us to look deeper. It's forcing us to look at family living and family life. It's forcing us to look at community living and community life. And I think the time has come for us in some way to upskill ourselves, and maybe that's down to the church, that's down through education, to that we can in some way upskill ourselves to deal with these types of problems that are emerging. Because if we can upskill ourselves, and if society can be upskilled to transform their emotions, and there are ways to do that. And if we can transform our emotions in some way, we can positively navigate our way through this transitional phase into something greater that is going to emerge. I have no doubt about it. We see politically and economically that there are mechanisms being put into place to deal with the economic and the political change that's taking place. So we have to realize there's no going back to the old model of living. The old model of living created a society that had lost touch with itself. The hospitals were full. Diseases were on the increase. Something had to happen. We are getting a great opportunity here to upskill ourselves, a great opportunity to realize who we truly are as beings. And if we can work through this transitional phase, I have absolutely no doubt in time we will look back at this and we will see it as pivotal, and society can evolve out of this space into much greater, more spiritual, more connected human beings. I use the word lockout or logged out. Sometimes we need to log out of the old model of thinking and begin to log back into ourselves and allow the true essence of who we are to really emerge.
It sometimes strikes me, Michael, that there's almost a battle going on at the moment between, I think in the first phase, we all sort of tackled into, well, we're in this together. But that sort of cohesion, I feel, is breaking down a little bit around the whole thing of, we see it like in terms of the debates around who's going to get the vaccine and stuff like that. That there's a battle going on between, if you like, our compassionate self and yet our selfish self, if you like, in how we're going to journey through this transition.
We can get all the physical vaccines we like. And for sure, it has a role. But what about the spiritual vaccine? Who provides the spiritual vaccine? Because this is the void that still has to be filled. There's an aspect of us all that only the divine exists in. And whether we like it or not, because this is what I see in my work every day. When a mother rings me, she has a child of 4 years old that is diagnosed with some genetic type condition that is incurable, who's told that, the life of this child is very short. Now, no matter what you do, COVID is a small thing in those people's lives. 99% of people will overcome COVID. Yes, there are deaths and it's sad. But what about the spiritual vaccine? This is what I keep asking. And this is ultimately, that what we need to begin to realize, that we still have to find ways that when you talked about that cohesion, I think there's now the opportunity to create greater family cohesion, greater communication, greater community cohesion, greater community communication. I think that's what we need to embrace, that ultimately it comes back to ourselves, that we need to find inside ourselves that peace, that contentment, because, in my work, people, come into my clinic, and I have this lovely icon in the wall of my clinic, and the icon is the healing Christ. But the amount of people who have never seen it is amazing. They say, what is that on the wall? And I say, well, that's the healing Christ. Oh, really? And God, I've never seen that before. And, if you were to ask people, what is the image? So I think that, for the church perspective, in the past, it was all about the crucifixion, and while it was absolutely critical and not to demean that, for me, and when I talk to people in my clinic, I say, look, what about the Christ that reflected healing, compassion, love, forgiveness? All of these types of things is what we need to embrace right now. But most importantly, I think that there are two other aspects. I think trust is a great thing. Trust that in time everything will be okay. Surrender. I think there's a very powerful, liberation that happens when we surrender our problems to the divine. Yeah, I find myself in difficulties sometimes. I get stressed because of work. I'm dealing with patients and I'm dealing with problems, and there's so many people trying to get in, and you're doing all this, and you're stressed because you're trying to live your own life and do your own thing. But for me, I've learned that, okay, can I handle this? No, alone, absolutely not. How can I handle this? Can I talk to a friend? Absolutely. But when I go home at night time and I sit down, I have to lay that at the door of somebody. And what I do is I lay it at the door. There is a very good surrender prayer, that people can use. And I think if we can learn to surrender, to let go, that there is a greater power that can help us. It can help us to transform that anxiety and stress into a greater vitality, I believe. And we just need to find ways of teaching people how to do this. Because my experience is when they do it, their lives can change. And that's not being a religious person. That's just really recognizing the value of being grounded in something spiritual. We had the grounding in religion when we grew up. We were always told there was something else there. But we've evolved to understand that it's a little bit more than just words. That our connection to nature in itself can be just so powerful.
We'll take another break for music, Michael. The voice there of Michael Jackson and Heal the World. A music choice of our guest, Michael O Doherty, on Beyond Belief here this evening. Michael, if I can just come to something specific, in the time we're living in the past year as well, we've discovered, the use of technology and how beneficial it is for keeping in contact and that. But I noticed in your work, you're also, I suppose, being healthily critical of technology and our use of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I spend a considerable period of time using the IT platforms. Have they a role? Absolutely, from the point of view of, for yourself to say mass, to connect with the community, fantastic. But that's on one end of the scale. On the other end of the scale, I'm hearing parents coming in to me saying, well, my child can't get up in the morning, can't wake it up. Why? Well, it's all day on the phone. It's all night on the phone. It's sitting down. It's on YouTube. It's playing games. So now we know scientifically again and statistically, we now know that children, I hate to use the word addiction. I did use the word recently and I came back and thought about that. I think there's an over-reliance. There's an absolute over-reliance on the social media. And the over-reliance is there because we're trying to fill time. I mean, when I grew up or you grew up, we never became bored. Now we're told, children are bored. How could you get bored? I mean, there's so much to do in life. There's so much living, there's so much that we can embrace in life and nature. And I was talking to parents about this the other day, and I was saying, well, what can I do with my kids? Well, I said, this is spring. Why don't you go home and create a healing garden in your back garden? Imagine if you had a place in your back garden right now, no matter how small it is, where you had lovely plants, where you had a little place where you could sit down on, where you could sit and relax and do a little bit of breathing and just see how nature works, see how plants grew, see how they change, look at the seasons, get plants. So to create a healing garden in your own back garden, how powerful that will be, and to get the kids to engage family in it. The benefits of that would be enormous. So it's about, we know the statistics that on average people are checking their phones every 7 minutes. The data goes right back to 2002. We know that people are checking their phone 5 minutes within waking up in the morning. So we can see statistically that the average child, certainly if we go for America and UK, is spending 11 hours a day. if we take modern day where, because of COVID, children are doing 7 classes a day, possibly maybe 40 minutes, 30 to 40 minutes. So that's 3.5 hours. So now they're on their Instagram, now they're on their Snapchat or, TikTok or whatever. So the time just builds up. The problem with that is that we adapt a behavior, okay? And that behavior often is with food, and it's the wrong type of food. So we're sitting, we're gazing at screens. It's eating up our time. It's draining our energy. We're fueling our energy with the wrong types of foods. Late at night, the blue light is actually affecting our production of melatonin, which is our sleep hormone. And if we don't sleep properly, because what it does, the screens do at nighttime, is they block off what we call the REM cycles. We go through 6 REM cycles per night. These are rapid eye movement cycles. And the light from the screen basically fools the brain to think that it's the middle of the day. So ultimately, the physiological reaction to that is poor sleep. So poor sleep leads to poor concentration, leads to poor focus. So the entire vicious cycle is just enormous. And then that chronic fatigue that comes with that feeling of anxiousness and depression that comes with that, that's what we're dealing with right now. This is a fallout from COVID. And parents are at their wits' end, to use a better word, trying to figure out how. So we do need solutions. We have to find solutions for people, for children, not just children, but families in general, to overcome this virtual world that we're living in. This is a planet. We need to come back on it from time to time. At the moment, we're locked into this world. We're being sucked into this virtual world because it's like a vortex. We're just sucked into it, and we're being exploited and used. And as I said, the results are just detrimental to people.
Maybe at another stage, Michael, we'll come back and talk about the whole impact of technology and on children and for families in detail, because I know you're doing a lot of work with others on this whole area. But we're here on the first Sunday of the season of Lent. A time where we're encouraged in some way to be repentant and to maybe challenge ourselves and maybe take on something special for this season. From your aspect, from just what we've been talking about in our use of technology, have you any ideas of what we might be able to do during this time? Yeah,
and we could also change the word repent to retreat. And I think that's what this is, Lent, this is what this, again, space can be about, that we can retreat back into ourselves. Give ourselves time to connect to ourselves. And if we can just, I would say to people, just like the healing garden, imagine if you just decided to do that, or maybe put up a polytunnel and start growing vegetables and things over the period of Lent. And the two things, if it comes to IT, the two things that with regard to IT disconnect, because we need to unplug and have that digital timeout. I would say if families listen, forget about giving up sweets and giving up chocolate and all that. That's all fine. That's great. But look, that's not the problem. Often our food is a behavior as a result of a problem. The problem, like I outlined, can be stress or anxiousness and fatigue associated with IT. So let's decide to do two things. One, let's decide to sit down at our meals and have no IT platforms. No phones, no iPads, no computers, no screens. News, everything off. That's the first thing. Second thing, bedroom. In the bedroom, no phones, no pads, no iPads, no screens. No screen time while we're eating, no screen time while we're sleeping. If society could make that adjustment, it would have a huge impact, because we would have to look at that time. How would we fill that time with proper sleep? How would we fill that time we'd be eating and communicating as a family together? And then from there, because only recently there was an article published in the Times or the Independent showing a family in Tipperary who did it for the last year. Just the weekends, they decided no IT stuff on the weekend, and they said the difference it made in their family. And when I see the children coming to me who have issues and they take this step, while they're eating, no IT stuff, while they're sleeping, it's changed their life completely. And it's actually beginning to force them out into nature. This is spring, new beginning, new life, new you. That's what you got to start thinking about.
Michael, that's a very hopeful note to end our conversation. And I thank you so much for your time, for your expertise, and for the way in which you've articulated something that's very, very important and that is unifying for us as human beings. And may I wish God's blessing upon you on your work. Thank you very much for chatting to us.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.